This is the fourth of a series of 30-minute films that Mike Grieves shot during the early 1970s on visits to Southern Africa. And I'm very pleased to say that we're joined by Mike today from his home in Germany. And my first query was why we're actually starting at Beaconsfield, but perhaps Mike can introduce the series anyway.
Well, hello, my name is Mike Grieves, age nearly 78. I went to South Africa in 1972 with 24 others and went around the country in a clockwise direction. And the end of Reel 3 finished in Beaconsfield. That was the locomotive depot for the Kimberley DR main line. And we're going to be concentrating on Bloemfontein by this film. Bloemfontein was a real railway hub in those days. There was a locomotive depot with an allocation of 179 locomotives, and there were 4 routes, 3 of which were steam. The line southwards to Springfontein was diesel by this time, but the line to Kimberley, the line to Kroonstad, Johannesburg, and the line to Bethlehem were all steam, and it was a train spotter's and filmer's delight. The line to Kroonstad, 206 kilometres, was the busiest. There were 100 trains a day on that line, and there was a famous photo spot called Copy about here, and trains came by every 10 minutes. Now, this is Beaconsfield. This is 7 kilometres south of Kimberley, where the line to Bloemfontein branches off. It was single track. It was quite heavily trafficked with a lot of sidings. And this is Kloofeind, about 20 odd kilometres outside Bloemfontein. This is a 25 condenser 484 coming along on a coal train. In the afternoon period, late afternoon, there were a number of commuter trains, largely for the African population, to the townships outside Bloemfontein. This is the class 15F. There were 228 of these 15Fs. They were quite well liked by the engine crews.
F, so 482
482
types, yeah.
They were built by German builders mostly. Now this is the class 23. There were 136 23s. They were built just before the Second World War by German builders. And at the time of my visit, only 6 had been scrapped. The difference in between the 23s and the 15Fs was that the tenders of the 23s were a little bit longer and therefore identifiable. This is just a local train, tender first 15F with a train on the Bloemfontein line towards Bethlehem.
Was tender first running common?
Yes, it was quite common. It wasn't common for long haul trains. It was common for short duration commuter trains because there weren't any turntables. Engines were turned on a triangle. Turntables were extremely rare in South Africa. Now this is on the line towards Bethlehem. This line also had trains going towards Aliwal North. There weren't too many trains, but at 9 or 10 in the morning, there were quite a few. And this is a class 16 DA, an American-built Pacific, on a local freight train. Here we see 3 of the other fellow photographers on the side of the line. All railway lines in South Africa were fenced off. It was to keep animals off the right of way.
is it true to say that almost all steam locomotives on South African railways were coal-fired?
Yes, they were all coal-fired. There was no, it was a country of nil oil and vast amounts of coal. A lot of the freight trains, of course, from the reefs. The reef is the region south and east of Johannesburg. It's a coal mining area. A lot of the freight trains were just hauling coal from that region to locomotive depots for the fuel for the locomotives.
This looks like a much heavier train, Mike.
Yes, this is the 0900 hours from Bloemfontein to Bethlehem. It stopped everywhere, took a journey of about 9 hours. There wasn't much in the way of car ownership in those days, and there weren't any motorways. There was the law of the land that all freight transport had to be by rail if it was over 50 kilometres. Now, this is the Orange Express. This is one of the crack trains of this line. This train ran from Durban to Cape Town. It didn't stop everywhere. It was a bit of an express train, and the SAR, they turned out their best groomed Class 23s at this train. Here we are at Kloofeind. We've been here before on this video already. There's one of my fellow photographers. Here's a train arriving in Kloofeind. It was a bit of an upgrade from the Kimberley direction into Bloemfontein. It's a double header.
I see the second engine had a condensing tender.
Yes. There were 90 of these Class 25 condensing locomotives and 50 non-condensers, and they were used primarily on the arid desert route south of Kimberley by Daggafontein to Beaufort West, which was not electrified then, and they could run 1,000 kilometres without having to take any water. All freight trains had these caboose-type vehicle at the back of the train. That was discontinued about 1985, when a lot of these local trains ceased to exist. Even before the end of apartheid, the motorway networks was built, and that was the end of monopoly freight for the railways.
Some of these freight trains are pretty substantial.
They are indeed, yes. And as you could imagine, the sound was quite spectacular. Now, this is the locomotive depot at Bloemfontein. It was absolutely huge, lots and lots of stalls. Only locomotives from its home base in Bloemfontein that came here. It was locomotives from Kroonstad, which had 104 locomotives, and from Bethlehem 130. And this is the so-called coal stage. The coal was shunted up, 4 wagons was pushed up a fairly steep hill by whatever locomotive was available, and the coal went into a chute and onto the tenders of the engines. And this coal stage was to be seen at virtually every major stage, but there were a dozen or so locomotive depots had the coal stage. It was quite a heavy load for a uphill push. Happened about 4 or 5 times a day. It was just luck if you were there when it happened. Now, this is a place called Showgrounds, 3 railway lines to be seen at one location. There was always something going on, shunts to and from marshalling yards. This is an older Class 14, British built. Here's a local train with a 16DA American Pacific. Built by Baldwin in the late 1930s. And here's a freight train on the line to Kroonstad. Freight trains about every 15 to 20 minutes. Here we are again on the line towards Bethlehem. We had a degree of police trouble here. A policeman came up in a car and wanted to see our passports, and as we had British passports, we seemed to get away with it. But this is an Afrikaans-speaking part of the world, and security seemed to be a bit tight for some reason.
Did it ever reach the point where you were frog-marched away by the police?
No, not. I had that on my trips to Eastern Europe, but not in South Africa. No, being a British subject was a bit of a good thing to have.
Is this the same location again?
Yes, this is the same location, 15 or so kilometres outside Bloemfontein on the line to Bethlehem. Now, here's a 19D class. There were 337 of these 19s in various subclasses, 19A, B, C, and D. And this train would have been going to Aliwal North, which branched off from the Bethlehem line at Sanapos, 35 kilometres out of Bloemfontein. We went here on 2 mornings as we had such good luck on day 1.
I see there's a mixture of semaphore and colour light signalling. Do you think the signalling practice was similar to British signalling?
Oh yes, the railways were all built by the British when it was part of the British Empire, and it was formed in 1910 by various private railways. It became SAR. This is the day train to Aliwal North, which is a distance of about 280 kilometres. There was a daily train, and 3 days a week there was a night train, or by 19D. Here we are back on the Kimberley line, outside Kloofeind, a convenient location high up.
It's an interesting view because you can see very clearly the difference in the tenders.
Yeah. 25N 25 non-condenser and 25 condenser. There's not much in the way of operating steam in 2024, but last year there was a charter on this line with one of the 25 NCs, which is kept at Beaconsfield. But I gather they had operating problems because there's a lot of corruption in South Africa these days. Copper and steel and equipment is stolen. Most of these small stations have been vandalised meanwhile.
Where are we now?
This is the double track main line towards Kroonstad. And it's a very busy line with, as I said at the beginning, 100 trains a day. Passenger as well as freight, day and night. It was electrified in early 1976. Locomotive crews were very inquisitive as to why we were taking pictures. They waved usually. Sometimes the looks on their faces were of astonishment. And there weren't many railway enthusiasts in those days, but there was a railway society in Johannesburg and called the Railway Society of South Africa.
Were the passenger trains segregated in terms of which coaches?
Oh yes, the blacks and whites were not together. You know, generally the accommodation for Europeans, as the whites were referred to, was at the back of the train, so that the Bantu people they got all the dirt from the steam and oh no, there was no. It was segregation in every walk of life. The stations were segregated. There was a footbridge. One half of the footbridge was for blacks, while the other half of the footbridge was whites only. There were seats on stations which were for whites only. And the same in big stations with waiting rooms.
And the locomotive crews were all white?
The locomotive crews were all white, yes, but the servicing crews were blacks, and they seemed to do their job, and there was a degree of cooperation between the races. It wasn't so severe in parts of Natal. I remember we stayed in a hotel in Natal near Pietermaritzburg, and the blacks and the whites got on very well together, but it was not viewed very highly by the Pretoria government until 1990, when it all changed. But the development of South Africa in the last 30-odd years, it hasn't been too favourable.
remind us of these locomotive classes?
Yes, this line was almost exclusively 15F. The passenger trains generally were class 23. This is the scene I particularly like because of the smoke development, and the locomotive crew waved us as they went by.
Some classes of locomotives had stokers, or were they all manually fired?
The 25s, the modern 25s, which were built in the 1950s, they were stoker fired, but I don't believe the others were stoker fired. I went to South Africa in 1973 and also 1975, and in 1973 we were only three of us, and we enjoyed a footplate ride from Kimberley to where we got off in Crancollar where our hotel was located, and it was quite an exhilarating journey.
Did you do quite a bit of research before the trip to work out where the
yes, I did quite a bit of research. I bought a book at the Continental Railway Circle, Steam on the Veldt, which is available online. It's a bit of a collector's item, I suspect, and it gave a breakdown of all the classes available. And I also was able to get a South African Railways timetable. There was an office of the South African Railways in Trafalgar Square in London. I still have it here, and it was a mine of information. It gave distances in kilometres, altitudes, which trains had restaurant cards. It even had information about visas from Malawi, Mozambique, Rhodesia and Mozambique. It was very interesting to read before we left the UK. So we knew what lines, by word of mouth from the Continental Railway Circle, had good scenery, and also the altitude gave indications of where steep grades were to be found. We only had 2.5 weeks to play with, so it was a question of using the time to the best of the 16 or 17 days we had at our disposal. And there were some days when the weather wasn't so good. But with city film, it's more, the scenes are brighter in poor weather with city film than it is with still photography. Now, we've left the Bloemfontein line. This is now in the Reef region. This is a short branch line from Springs to Nigel. Springs is about 50 kilometres southeast of Johannesburg, and there was a service of local trains with class 24s. There were 100 of these class 24s. They were built by North British in 1950. The scenery in this part of the world is not very exciting, and there's a lot of industrial concerns as well. In Springs, there is an abattoir for the beef and sheep industry, and there was a train about 5 o'clock in the afternoon to the abattoir with an S-class. There weren't too many of these S-class. There was only, I think, about 20 of them, and they were all used in this locality. Now, this part of the world had a lot of industrial concerns, gold mines, coal mines, platinum mines, and they all had their railway systems. and you're going to see some of it in a minute.
We've changed locations again.
Yes, this is near Springs, the short line from Springs to Nigel.
Okay.
50 odd kilometers from Johannesburg. Now this is the Daggafontein gold mine. These two locomotives were hauled out for us. I don't think we were announced. We just turned up on spec. This is an H2 class 482 tank at a coal mine. These engines were built by Dubs in Glasgow about 1900.
Which main town is this close to?
Between Springs and Witbank.
Okay.
The locomotives used on these industrial lines were second-hand from SAR, older classes which would otherwise have not found any use on SAR. And these short-haul trains fed power stations by and large.
I take it there's no passenger service on this line.
No passenger trains here, no. Although the local black people, they sat on the coal wagons and had hitched a free ride. I saw that in China as well. That was quite widespread in China. Now here's a former Rhodesian Railways 16 class. We didn't know that this was here, but it was just by sheer luck. End of the shift, the locomotives coming back onto shed.
Which end of the line is this?
New Clydesdale Colliery, it was called. I'm not quite sure exactly the exact location, but it's somewhere north of Springs. Now, on these industrial concerns, there were black men doing the locomotive driving, and their skills were none too professional. Sometimes the wagons were shunted up rather violently. Now, this is in the Witbank region. There were 3 coal mines: Witbank number 1, 2, and 3. Ice blue colour of these engines, and they were kept quite nice and clean.
Remind us again of the vintage of these engines.
1925 or so, thereabouts. Some of them were really old. There was a 410-2, which was built around in 1900. Mostly had British builders. And quite easy to chase, although the roads weren't tarred around here. It was fairly easy to follow by car.
So they were almost exclusively hauling coal rather than
Yeah.
the mined ore.
No, no, only coal. There's no ore around here at all. Now, this is the main line from Pretoria towards Mozambique, uh, which was not electrified from Pretoria to Witbank, electrified thereafter. And this was the predominance of the 15 CA class, which were built by Alto and Baldwin, and they were extremely loud. There was one night passenger train and one day passenger train, but otherwise lots and lots of freights from the Witbank coalfield. This is the day train from Kumati port on the Mozambique border to Pretoria.
You can fairly clearly see the older passenger stock at the front of the train.
Yes.
Presumably that's imported oil.
That's water. That would be water for outlying communities. There wasn't running water in the outlying communities, and the blacks didn't have supplies to running water, so they were serviced by trains with water in them. Now, this is our last day in South Africa. We flew back to London on the Saturday evening, and this is the line from Pretoria to Petersburg. And on the Saturday, there were quite a few trains that only ran on Saturdays, trains for the blacks who worked during the week in the mines in the Reef region, back home to where they lived. And there was some freight as well. And it was nearly all 15Fs. There were a couple of 24s. And we didn't go very far outside Pretoria because our flight was at 7:30 in the evening. We had to hand in the hired car as well. So we didn't want to venture too far away from the airport. I still keep in touch with the organizer of this tour, David Thornhill. He's the same age as me, 4 months younger.
The locomotives on this line appear to be all the same.
Yeah, it's all 15Fs. Latterly, the last station in South Africa was called Byte Bridge. And in more recent years, an extension has been built into what is now Zimbabwe, then Rhodesia. But the passenger services from South Africa to Rhodesia were via Mafeking, different railway route through Botswana. And that line, I believe, doesn't have any passenger trains at all now. But I don't think there's any passenger trains to Rhodesia or, as we say, Zimbabwe via this line anyway. Just occasional tourist trains like Rovos Rail. Class 24. These Class 24s were originally built for Southwest Africa, now Namibia, where water supplies were few and far between, hence the long tender. That's the end of Reel 4.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike, for a fascinating insight into South African railways when steam was still king.